Hi everybody, this is Kim Pate with CFED. I'm going to get started with a few housekeeping slides. And I'm just going to move this over. All right. Welcome everybody to today's webinar, Money Smart Kids, Advancing Opportunity for Children and Youth Through Savings and Financial Education. First, we're going to take care of these housekeeping items that I mentioned. We sent out detailed instructions for dialing in today, and I know we've been working with you to make sure everybody's logged in, pinned in, and ready to go. And if there are any issues, feel free to email us, webinars@cfed.org, if there are any problems at all. We are monitoring that email right now. We are recording today's webinar, and we will send it to you shortly after our presentation today, and we're also going to share a copy of the PowerPoint slides. We will have okay, great. So we will have our phone lines unmuted today during the webinar. If you've been on other CFED webinars, you might have been muted the whole time and asked to send questions through the chat function of this webinar platform. But today we're actually encouraging you to engage with us in some open discussion. So we're going to have all of the phones open. But if you're in a noisy environment, we want you to mute your line unless you're speaking. And you can do this by using your phone's mute button. And you can also mute and unmute your line in the GoToWebinar control panel by clicking on the, quote, mute icon next to your name. And if you feel more comfortable, you can also send in questions or comments anytime using the webinar control panel. So the three speakers you'll hear from today are myself. I'm CFED's Chief External Relations Officer, along with Leigh Tivol, our Director of Savings and Financial Security. And we'll also hear today from Veronica Hicks, the Marketing and Entrepreneurial Services Manager for ONABEN. And Veronica is going to give us a quick introduction and some grounding in the work they're doing with you and why we're here today.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, and we're so appreciative of CFED to partner with us on any of our SEI initiatives. As you're all aware of, when we were at Skamania, we developed some mutual interest groups that kind of would outline some of the future webinars and events that we would prepare for each of you to take part in. And this is the first of hopefully many webinars to come. I've worked with CFED in the past when I was still with the Cherokee Nation, and they did some really exciting and interesting things with us in terms of youth entrepreneurship and savings programs geared towards young people. So I know that they're going to be a great resource for us today and in the future. This webinar is actually presented by CFED, so that's really all that I have to say. I just want to thank you guys for participating and actively become involved in the dialogue, just like you do at one of our face-to-face events when we all get together as SEI cohort members, because this is a great opportunity for you to gain some more knowledge or maybe revamp a program that you already have going in your organization for match savings or youth IDA programs. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kim and Leigh.
Thanks so much, Veronica. So thank you all for attending this afternoon's session on bank accounts, saving, and financial education, and how these strategies can benefit your programs. I also want to acknowledge the support of the Northwest Area Foundation, who have enabled us to be here today and to work with you in support of Native American programs interested in these topics. And they have long been a supporter of CFED's work, including a lot of deep research and applied knowledge around how to build assets and entrepreneurial opportunities in Native American communities. So this is a really exciting follow-on to previous work we've been doing. And what my colleague and I are here to talk about today is how savings and financial education can help children and youth achieve their higher education goals. And this is really the big idea that we would like to focus on today. So for the first part of this session, we want to share with you some new theory some new research and some on-the-ground practice that can connect children and youth, savings and assets, and educational outcomes. In other words, we really want to connect our world to yours. Then we'll share some detailed thoughts about how to integrate savings and financial education into your work. And finally, we'll talk about how you can access free one-on-one technical assistance and support to further savings programs for kids and youth in your local communities. So I just want to take a moment to give you a few words of introduction about CFED. We are a national nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. We also have a satellite office in San Francisco and one in North Carolina. And we work to help families build strong economic foundations for their future. We are a national intermediary and like to describe ourselves not as a think tank, but as a think and do tank. And I like to say that we are a small organization with a big mission. We help people save and invest, own homes, and start small businesses. In all of our work, we try to work across public policy, private markets, and community practice to expand economic opportunity for everyone. And we've been doing this for more than 30 years and excited to share some of what we know with you today. So we talked about the big idea, and I'm just going to read you this slide. So it's essentially savings and financial education activities designed to address the financial barriers and asset creation that can help Native American youth and children achieve their financial goals. So let's talk a little bit about assets. Traditionally, assets have been bank accounts, savings accounts, real estate, businesses, education, everything that we have here on the slide. But we also know that access to quality financial services, financial education, there we go, good credit, and other typical ways of building your financial capability that may exist in Native American communities in special and different ways can also qualify as assets. There are significant disparities in both median wealth by race and asset ownership by race. And this is a problematic and unfortunately downward trending condition in this country. The median wealth of white households is 20 times that of black households and 18 times that of Hispanic households. And these lopsided wealth ratios are the largest since the government began collecting and publishing such data a quarter of a century ago. And it's roughly twice the size of the ratios that had prevailed between these three groups for the 2 decades prior to the Great Recession that ended in 2009. We don't have good data for Native Americans, but we are working with partners in a number of Native American communities to begin to look at how that data could be collected and reflected better in some of these national studies. But we know that it's just as bad for Native Americans, if not worse. And similarly, minority communities are less likely to have a 4-year college degree and college success. Okay, so what SEED and other research studies have taught us about the impact of assets on children, and SEED stands for Savings for Entrepreneurship, Education, and Down Payment, which was a large demonstration project that CFED did for several years that ended a couple years ago, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But what we've really learned in our research is that, first, when we think about upward mobility, income is really less important than assets. 71% of children born to low income but high saving parents move up from the bottom income quartile over a generation, compared with only 50% of children of low saving, low income parents. Second, lack of assets can impact child development. By age 3, large gaps can be seen in the vocabularies of children and families receiving public assistance compared to their counterparts in wealthier families. And third, assets can have both economic and aspirational impacts on college attendance and completion. A longitudinal research study uncovered that children with mothers who had high expectations of them were more likely to have higher GPAs and graduate from high school. So we can see that assets really do matter for children and youth and can be an important component of their upbringing. So there's a growing body of work that's highlighting the specific outcomes of saving and assets on educational outcomes for youth. And as you can see from this slide, children in families with as little as $3,000 in savings had better odds of graduating from high school than those without savings. And as you can also see, children with college savings, regardless of income, scored higher on tests measuring math knowledge. And kids with those accounts were also more likely to expect to go to college and are nearly twice as likely to be in college than those without an account. And finally, when the kids have savings accounts in their own name, and this is a big ticket item for us, they are 6 times more likely to attend and complete college. 6 times more likely. So that's a really important impact that college savings accounts can have on youth. And I just want to note that when we talk about college, we really mean a range of educational options, so both tech schools, 2-year, 4-year schools, training in a specific craft or industry. And so the key here is the importance of some sort of higher education or training beyond high school, whatever shape it takes. So we have some new asset building tools. One is the Children's Savings Account. Children's Savings Accounts are a increasingly promising way and gaining a lot of attention across public and private sectors right now for college-going children and their families. And in their ideal form, what CSAs look like are established very early in life. The earlier the better. They're seeded by an initial deposit and kind of added on to by contributions from family and friends and the kids themselves, and that they're augmented by incentives such as a savings match or some other type of benefit that they receive, as well as age-appropriate financial education, and that they're used for an asset-building purchase, such as higher education at age 18. So we have some leading children's savings account models. One is the SEED initiative, which I mentioned before, the Savings for Education, Employment, and Down Payment initiative that CFED ran. It was the first national test of children's savings accounts, or CSAs. It served more than 1,400 children in 12 communities across the country and was our critical proof of concept. It was also where we began our work with Cherokee Nation and learned a lot about how children and youth in Native American contexts uniquely need to understand the power of money and what it can do for them, not only in terms of helping them to save and eventually go to college, but also how they can be entrepreneurial and start enterprises with one another that can lead to some pretty dramatic outcomes that, again, will help them later in life in their futures, possibly through college, but other things. We also, through a project called the Partnership for College Completion, linked the savings accounts with scholarships, financial education, and academic counseling through the KIPP charter schools and the United Negro College Fund. And the Kellogg Foundation's Asset Building for Children initiative, we are helping Kellogg Foundation and their local partners to build scalable CSA models in Michigan and Mississippi. And finally, San Francisco's Kindergarten to College is the first universal children's savings account program, which basically means that every public school kindergartner receives an account in San Francisco. And these kinds of models are being explored in other places, including Newark, New Jersey, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and other places. So we're going to pause here for a minute, and I'm going to see if you guys have some responses to these discussion questions that will give us a chance to explore a little bit what your reactions are to what we've shared so far and what you're interested in learning more about. And in the second half of the presentation, we're going to talk more about the details of this strategy and how it could actually work. So for now, don't ask us implementation questions, but let's stay kind of at that high level and just look at the big picture and see if this makes sense to you and whether this could provide real value to the children and youth in your communities. So the first question I have is, what's your reaction to these ideas about saving and financial education, and how could savings and financial education activities benefit your children and youth? And the phones are open, so feel free to dive in. And make sure your lines are unmuted.
Can I just say something about my experience as your organization?
Sure, go ahead. Great.
I just wanted to say that so many of you have not just an interest in the Youth IDA match savings program, but also that youth entrepreneurship model. And for us, the SEED program that she spoke a little bit about was a great way for us to instill, that entrepreneurial spirit among our young people, but at the same time give them a lesson in, financial literacy. It was just a pretty easy model to implement, and so for me personally, since that's the one that I actually know about, when you're thinking about some of these ideas or the different programs that they have, my community is a little bit different than some of the more reservation-based areas, but I believe that it's a model that could work.
That's great. Thanks, Veronica. And yeah, so one of the things that CFED does, in addition to Children's Savings Account, is youth entrepreneurship. And I do have a background in that and was the person who went out to Cherokee Nation and trained everyone in that school-based enterprise model. So, we're happy to talk about a range of ways we could work with you, but we are going to focus, today on Children's Savings Accounts as the way in. So other responses to our questions or other questions that you might have? And make sure you're unmuted. Well, I have a question, which is, I know that a lot of you are long-term grantees of the Northwest Area Foundation or long-term partners of ONABEN or both. And I'm just curious if there are ways that you've been exploring children's savings or children's financial education in the past, and I'm wondering how that went and who some of your partners might have been.
Kim, can you hear me? This is Tawny Brunch with Lakota Funds.
Hi, Tawny. How
great.
are you?
Sure, if my line was unmuted. I'm doing great. We obviously, Lakota Funds, with the support of Northwest Area Foundation, started the exploring this pilot project of the child development accounts just this last October. And so obviously there's a huge need here on the Pine Ridge Reservation, being the third poorest county and all of the terrible things that we are. Mm-hmm. We realized because of our work with the youth, we've been in the schools teaching financial literacy. We've been offering the youth IDA previous to that. We understood that there was a need to kind of address the issue at a much earlier age, and that's why we jumped on this project where we start offering the match savings accounts just like everybody else's, where you see the account, and we thought it was critical that you start in kindergarten and first grade. But the other part of that, besides just building that individual's, that kid's own savings account, is the financial literacy component. And honestly, that's where we're struggling, because like anything else, when we're living in such economically challenged conditions, we're more in subsistence mode every day. And so what we're finding our biggest challenge in really moving that financial literacy piece along is that we still have, most families have challenges even in attending meetings. Yeah. And so I'm anxious to hear your thoughts about the ways that we can overcome that, to really get the families to participate. Otherwise, they're just going to have a savings account at the end, and they're not going to necessarily be any better off for knowing how to maintain it or help that grow, or so it can fully benefit that family.
Okay, well that's very helpful, Tani. I think it is important to get a window into what the real situation is for families, and we're actually going to segue now into more information on just this subject. So hold on to any other questions you guys have, because we're going to move on and come back to some questions a little bit later. I'm going to hand it over to Leigh Tivol now, who's going to take us through the detailed background of these options.
Thanks, Kim. And Kim and I are going to kind of tag team a little bit here, so you might hear us both jump in. And again, I encourage any of you on the phone who have a question or a comment to unmute yourselves and pipe up at any point. It's great to be talking with all of you, so thanks for this opportunity. So so Tani, you've raised a great point, and we'll get to that in just a minute. I just want to start by saying, this kind of asset building work for children and youth can take a lot of different shapes and forms. And so I think what's just most important to remember is that we're going to share some basic ideas with you today, some examples of what we've seen work in a range of different places, but it's just important to remember that these always have to be customized in any community to fit the families and the needs and the dynamic that you're facing in your community. So for example, we've talked a lot about savings as a link to higher education. But you might be interested in focusing more on entrepreneurship or on other needs in the short term. That's fine. So what I hope is that in offering a little bit of an overview today, you'll find the pieces that are helpful for you. You'll raise up with us questions about what we haven't covered, and we're happy to follow up with you offline, which Kim can talk about more later if there's something we can't get to today. So what we want to cover today are kind of three relevant activities that fall into this category of asset building for children and youth. And I guess what I want to say here is that you could do one of these, you could do all of these, you could do any sort of combination of these, but if it feels really daunting to think about doing a full-on savings program for kids, that's okay. You might be able just to start with the financial education piece, or perhaps you've already been doing that and you'd like to kick it up a notch and provide accounts or savings incentives. That's great too. So we're going to cover all of these. Certainly financial education is in some ways the most straightforward, although I think as Tani has raised, in certain situations there are logistical challenges that are important to pay attention to. Second option is to work with a bank or a credit union or a 529 college savings provider to actually open savings accounts for students. And then the third option we want to describe is promoting that savings through financial incentives and other supports. So in a minute here, we're going to kind of walk through the essential components of designing and implementing each of these and give you a sense of how to get started. And for those of you who've already gotten started, again, chime in with questions that you may have. So on the financial education side, again, this is about providing both kids and parents with the information, knowledge, and skills that will allow them to make informed financial decisions. So one example of this, and obviously in a much more urban community, is the Chicago Public Schools, who have chosen, as many communities, both rural and urban have, to execute their financial education for kids in the school setting. And I think this is something we're doing in places, again, as urban as Chicago and as rural as the Mississippi Delta, and everywhere in between. So Chicago Public Schools, they're the third largest school district in the country. They have many, many students to serve, which gave them a particular challenge. They launched a financial education pilot course for almost 1,000 kids across the city a couple of years ago. Along with the kind of core curriculum that's part of the education, which includes post-secondary planning and budgeting and filling out the FAFSA, all that good stuff. They're also taking kids beyond the classroom by including field experiences. So they're taking kids to college visits to four-year universities and to a city college to talk to folks about financial aid options. They're having the opportunity to visit banks and the Federal Reserve that are within their community. So the idea here is that by putting that knowledge in context, they're getting a better understanding of the financial process on a larger scale. But Chicago, again, is a really big example. I just want to underscore that it's possible to do this on a much smaller scale and in a range of settings. So for those who aren't as familiar with this, most general financial education curricula cover the basic subjects that you see on the screen here: goal setting, setting a budget, wants versus needs, those kinds of things. The fact is that financial education for adults is different from financial education for kids in many ways, but what's important is that kids, just like adults, understand early in life that money can get us things that we want. And so a successful financial ed program for children and youth will really make sure that the content is relevant to them by relating it to things that they're already interested in and that they connect to. So for instance, for very little kids, financial education can be as simple as learning the difference between a nickel and a dime. But for a high schooler, that student may want to know, how do paychecks work? What do I look for when I'm buying a car? How do I pay for college? So some of the critical questions that we have to ask as we sketch out financial education programming in our communities, first is where and how will it be provided, and who will deliver that instruction. As far as where it's provided, we think, so that could be in school or out of school. It could be through another program, for example, a youth entrepreneurship program. It could be standalone. It could be some combination of the above. Again, we think it's most effective when it's connected to things that students are already doing. And then there's this question of who will deliver the instruction. And again, if it's in a school-based setting, that could be teachers, although teachers are often stretched thin. So it may be program staff, or maybe volunteers, or a combination. Teachers are really valuable providers of financial education, and delivering it in the classroom, we think, is an incredibly effective approach. For one thing, it gets kids where they are, so that, Tawny, some of the issues that you raised about families not even being able to get to a financial ed course, if we're delivering that during the school day, at least we can get to kids, maybe not their parents in this case, but at least we can get to the kids. But again,
we're doing both.
You're doing both. Great. That's terrific.
I'll save my questions on the other part of it for when you're done.
Okay, fair enough. Sure thing. So again, if you're going for an in-school model, and Tawny, I'm sure you could speak to this, if teachers are going to be providing that financial ed, obviously they'll need training. That's often new material for them. There are a number of organizations that offer financial education training resources for educators. You might also partner with your financial institution to come on site and deliver that in the school setting. Now, the parent financial ed piece, again, is really essential. It's typically not required for the kinds of children's savings programs that we've been involved in because it's often very hard, as Tawny has found, it's often very hard to mandate. But it's really important. The younger the child, the more important it is for the parent to have that financial ed. We've had some success with offering it in the school setting and capitalizing on times when parents are going to be in the school anyway. We've also had some success in referring folks to other organizations that are close to them. And we've also seen models that really tend to rely more on financial coaching, some of which can be done over the phone. That tends to be more one-on-one in nature, and so it can be more labor-intensive. But that's another approach that we've seen work, particularly in distance settings. But Tawny, did you have a question about this specifically?
I guess I'm just, what we're learning is that, and I didn't even realize it, honestly, was that the teachers are overloaded.
Yes.
Right. And so our approach was to, that they were going to jump on, just teaching this little lesson. We developed worked with Kathleen Sherman to develop the curriculum and stuff and had it all ready. And we thought they'd jump all over it because it's such a good program anyway, good for the kid and stuff. And the truth is, they don't have time. And so, honestly, we should have listened to, Four Bands already had this figured out with their Making Waves curriculum, how you have to figure out how the curriculum you want your teachers to teach for you fits into what they're already required to do during the day. And so we haven't done that yet, but we're working with Kathleen to do it. But, yeah, the more we can incorporate it directly into the regular, already, predetermined topics that they have to teach, the better off I think you're going to be. That's what we've learned on that so far.
Yeah, and this is Kim, Tani. I know that Cora May Haskell at Four-Bands has been doing a lot of refinement to that Train the Trainer curriculum they have for teachers. And there's a way to think about engaging volunteers, too. I think that the Making Waves campaign has done a lot of sort of best practices around. So we can talk more about that later offline or maybe later on this call, but I think you're raising an important point about capacity.
Right, yep, but it's just, I mean, I think it's critical that the child receives individually as the owner of the account, because we set ours up where the child is the sole owner. We're not even allowing the parents on as joint owners because we feel like it's important for the kid to grow up knowing this is theirs, that no one else, you know, depending on the circumstances or whatever, is going to have any access to it. Kind of empowers them as they get older. And so the fact that the child it is receiving the necessary, you know, financial education along the way to know how to fully utilize it without, you know, splurging and spending it all on some rash thing after they're done with this program is really key, we thought.
Yeah, the ownership of the account is really important, and we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. So thanks, Tawny. This is really helpful insight. The last quick thing I want to quickly say about financial education is about covering the cost of providing it. And while funding the person power is not always easy, certainly many of the resources that are available for financial education, the curriculum and so forth, are available for free. Financial institutions are often interested in helping. Again, many of you probably know this. So Making Waves is a great example of a curriculum. There are a couple of others that we wanted to just share with you. There are, of course, a zillion financial ed curricula out there. I think that's a technical term. So there's just a couple here, and we'll share this after the webinar as well. But you know, another piece that we think is really important are considering kind of some additional kind of add-ons, complementary add-ons to the financial education that may happen in the classroom or elsewhere. Thinking about peer circles and family circles, some of the research we've been seeing lately seems to indicate that just having an opportunity for a student to sit with their parent or with friends to talk about savings, to talk about financial education, can be a really powerful complementary tool, and that those kinds of groups have been demonstrated to increase savings in terms of people talking about what they care about and motivating them to save. And so moving on, actually, if we want to encourage kids to go beyond financial education and actually put into practice what they're learning in the classroom, the next step is getting them an account. And we really believe that financial ed is more powerful when it's paired with accounts and vice versa. The analogy that I always use is driver's ed. If we just had classroom instruction and no behind-the-wheel opportunity, we'd be pretty bad drivers. So wherever possible, we like to combine the two. So one example of an effort to open accounts and make saving easy for kids are bank at school programs. There are dozens of these across the country in all kinds of communities, and they do exactly what the name suggests. They are collaborations between financial educations and schools through which kids can open accounts and make deposits right in the school. That, of course, is particularly powerful if you're in a community where you are many, many miles from the nearest bank branch. Having a bank at school program can really make this present for kids in a whole new way. So typically this involves setting up a banking center in the school, as informal as a couple of folding tables in the school cafeteria once a month, or in some cases they've built full-fledged mini bank branches at the school. But either way, bank staff come on site to open accounts and take deposits, and in many cases they engage students in that process too. Now, not everybody has a bank at school program in their area, although it's certainly something that continues to gain traction, and you could certainly talk to your local financial institutions about that. But if you just wanted to open up some basic accounts for kids, there are a few things that are involved here. Identifying the bank or credit union or multiple banks or credit unions that you'll work with, helping students sign up for accounts, helping them start thinking about specific savings goals, whatever those might be, and finally making deposits easy. So in terms of some of the key design questions that we have to ask, first, what can the savings in the account be used for? So some savings programs restrict accounts and only allow withdrawals for an approved use. might be for higher education, might be entrepreneurship, might be homeownership like traditional IDAs. Others allow for other uses like musical instruments or sports equipment or art supplies, and some programs don't have any restrictions at all. It's up to you to determine the best structure for accounts in your communities. It's important to note, though, that if you're fundraising for savings incentives to add to the accounts, and we'll talk more about that later, some funders may have specific wishes as to how their funds will be used. Second question is, who is your financial institution partner, and what type of financial institution is the best fit? Is it a bank, a credit union, an investment company, or something else? You know, the critical message here, I think, is that consumers' firsthand experiences with that financial institution are going to be important indicators of success. So we have to think about what's the customer experience going to be, and what's the best possible experience that we can bring to our kids and families. For those of you in communities where bank-on initiatives are present, this is a good place to start. These are coalitions of local government, financial institutions, and community organizations that offer unbanked families, and so this is also available for parents, free or low-cost bank accounts and access to financial education. It's replicating in more than 70 places across the country, more than 30 already up and running. So if you visit joinbankon.org, you can see if there's a bank on in your city or your state, your area or your state, rather.
This is Kim. I just thought I'd jump in here and say that I know that some of your communities do have credit unions, including the Pine Ridge Credit Union that Tani just helped to create. So I encourage you to think about how the bank-on model could be relevant. We currently don't have any Native American bank-on models, and I think it's an area of great interest.
Mm-hmm. It's Lakota Federal Credit Union, Kim, and we might even have our doors open by September.
That's exciting.
Yes, it is huge, but I have actually visited with Deanne Dietrich at Black Hills Federal Credit Union in Rapid City. Black Hills Federal is a key partner in their bank-on movement in Rapid, and we've discussed the very same thing, how we can probably join forces and maybe make it a little bit more inviting for other Native communities to participate in the bank-on stuff if Lakota Federal Credit Union would join that movement.
Great, that's terrific. Well, we'll be looking forward to hearing about the progress that's made here.
Yeah.
Great. So the next piece I just want to mention quickly is the piece that, Tani, you touched on earlier, which is who will own this account? That's a really important question. You know, often for minors, some financial institutions will allow minors to own accounts on their own. Others will not and require a custodian on the account. So that could be a parent or guardian, or it could be someone else. And typically in the programs that we're involved in that do involve an account custodian, we recommend that it not be the parent or guardian. First, because we want to make sure that the funds in that account are protected for their intended use, and also because we want to make sure that it doesn't have any kind of negative impact on financial aid or any public benefits that a family might be receiving. So in some cases, it's a school or a local government or a nonprofit organization, or we've even been looking at whether a financial institution or CDFI could serve as a custodian. So that's an important question here. And then finally, last but certainly not least, what is the process for students enrolling and making deposits to accounts? What kind of identification is required? Do kids have to have socials? Do they have to have parental permission? How will they make deposits? And again, particularly in rural communities, but not exclusively in rural communities, it can be very hard to physically get to the bank branch, so are there, or credit union branch, so are there other ways that deposits can be made? So then the third main area that we want to touch on today is savings incentives. And so here we're looking at, once the accounts are open, what are the ways that we're encouraging kids to make deposits and actually use the accounts? So that might include providing financial incentives, or it might involve non-financial incentives and other supports. But the basic assumption here is that if we build it, we want them to come. And we believe that greater incentives will yield greater savings and lead to other desirable outcomes. And our experience in our other child savings programs has really showed us without question that low-income families can and will save in these kinds of accounts. So I'm going to skip the next slide just for time, but we've got lots of examples of these kinds of incentive savings programs. But what's typically involved is offering savings incentives if you wish to, and if you're doing that, distributing those and tracking them along with tracking deposit activity, and then providing other savings encouragement and support. So the critical questions here are really about what kinds of financial incentives are you interested in providing? Typically in the kinds of child accounts, as opposed to a youth IDA, but in the kinds of accounts for younger kids that we've been involved in, we tend to start the account off with an initial deposit, a seed, that gives the account some important momentum. The other reason that this is sometimes attractive is that some financial products require a minimum balance. You know, you might have to start the account with $25. So putting in an initial deposit can remove that barrier to participation and make those accounts somewhat more attractive, too, to participating financial institutions who know that they're going to at least have that minimum deposit there. And those initial deposits can range from very modest, you know, $10, $50, $100, up to quite substantial deposits in other scenarios. Savings matches are another opportunity similar to an individual development account or IDA. They match participant deposits in the account. The savings rate can vary, though, if you're designing your own children's savings account. And there's typically a cap on the contributions that are matched, so it's up to you and your funding source to determine what you want to do and what you can do in this realm. And then the other type of savings incentives that we frequently see are benchmark incentives or performance rewards, financial rewards that account holders and their families can earn for participating in certain activities or reaching certain milestones. So for instance, if a parent participates in financial education, they can have $25 or $50 deposited in their child's account. If a student receives good grades or has good attendance or graduates from a particular grade, perhaps a reward is placed in their account. Now, if you want to offer any of these kinds of incentives, especially the savings matches or performance rewards, you will need some kind of a system to manage how those incentives are paid out so that you can be sure that everyone's getting all the incentives that they've earned. This can be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet, or if you have a more complicated initiative, there's other software that's been designed just for programs like this. Now, of course, the financial incentives you offer will be guided by the resources available to pay for them. There are some common sources of savings incentives, and we'll talk about more in a minute, but are certainly foundations, financial institutions, employers, local businesses, individual donors, and faith-based organizations. And there's an important federal resource, too, which I'll mention in a minute. And then finally, not every incentive has to be financial in nature. Often non-financial rewards can be very powerful in encouraging savings. So for instance, in one of our savings initiatives in a charter school where kids wear uniforms, kids who saved the most in a classroom would win a non-uniform day, or they would win a pizza party for their classroom. What we're really looking at here is creating a culture of savings. So finally, before we get to some discussion, I would be remiss if I didn't mention an important resource for anyone considering a match savings component, and that is the National Network of IDEA Programs. I think there are folks on the call who already run IDEA programs, I'm assuming. Anybody doing that already and want to chime in?
Yeah, we are, obviously.
Christy Fensel, I co-administer Youth One in St. Louis City.
Hi, Christy. Yeah, that's great.
Hi.
Anyone else? Oh, good. Okay, well, that's great. That tells us that we have some folks who might actually, for whom this might be new. And it's great, Christy, to have you on the call. She's deeply involved in the IDEA realm, so feel free to jump in if there's anything that you want to add here. Just to say, individual development accounts, as you see here, are matched accounts with asset-specific goals that can be used for homeownership, small business, or post-secondary education, and they include a mandatory financial ed requirement. And the Federal Assets for Independence Program, or AFI, is the largest funder of IDEA programs nationally and could help to provide match for your initiatives. Many AFI-funded programs work with adults, but a growing number are also serving youth. And excitingly, in the last year or so, we've had a new initiative, the Native American Asset Building Initiative, which is a partnership between the Administration for Native Americans and the Office of Community Services, which runs the AFI program, which is really focusing on building the capacity of tribes and Native organizations to plan their projects and develop competitive funding applications for the AFI program. Now, unfortunately for us, the deadline for the last ANA round was just earlier this week. But that doesn't mean that the door is closed. I mean, I think that there's support and opportunity there for those of you who might be interested in exploring that particular partnership. There's tons more information about the AFI program in general at idaresources.org. We've also got a list of both AFI and non-AFI IDA programs on our website. So that might be an interesting partnership for those of you who aren't already in this space but are interested in bringing some kind of match savings to kids and families in your communities to link up with an existing organization that's already providing this kind of service. So we've covered just a huge amount of information in a very short time. We wanted to pause. We've got some discussion questions on the screen, and we want to just take a couple of minutes to have you ask some questions, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Kim to talk about some technical assistance resources that we are going to be able to provide. So anyone on the phone, you can certainly answer any of the questions on the screen here, or any other questions that you have about how you might explore making these kinds of financial education and savings programs work in your communities, and what kind of support would be helpful to you.
Hello?
Yes.
Hi, this is Adib with LNSO Ventures in Lummi, Bellingham, Washington.
Great. Hi.
Hi, how are you? I don't have any answers to any of the questions as usual, but here is a program that I'm going to try this summer, and if I can get some feedback, that would be great. I don't know if you've heard of, how these high schools have things called the mock trial, where students join and they bring in attorneys and they bring in judges and they go through cases and they, discuss them and then they debate them and they have a winner or whatever. So I was thinking of getting a group of young students. They have nothing to do in the summer, apparently, and getting them together, bringing in some, people from the bank, some tellers or whatever, and setting up, as you might want to call it, a mock bank, where we would actually pretend that we are starting a bank, and individuals will have opportunities to set up accounts, or we would get the expertise, from the banker, from the president, who would say, well, what does it take to actually start a bank? How does one start savings and actually start savings accounts, managing the funds, and seeing how far we can go. We've never tried this before, but it would be a similar program to what they do with these mock trials, and just call it a mock bank. And that way get the students, the young people, involved in actually going through the process and seeing what it takes to do this practice before they actually go into a real bank or a real, savings institution to start this, so they can understand the workings behind it before they participate in it.
That's a great idea. I love this. It's a perfect example of a flexible way to provide financial education in a really experiential setting that kids will kind of glom onto and be participating in actively. I think it's a wonderful example. Again, I just want to underscore this, that we've thrown out some of the basics here, that kind of the plain vanilla information around financial education and savings programs, but there are all kinds of different flavors out there, and you've got to find the flavor that's right for your community, and there's all kinds of great innovation. So this is, again, perhaps it's definitely not the plain vanilla model, but it's really exciting, and I think we'll be eager to hear how it goes, and could see some power in replicating that. It would be great if at the end of that process the kids actually did open accounts, and perhaps the bank that's participating and supporting you would be willing to put in a modest initial deposit to get it started.
Well, either that or I'll be accused of some Ponzi scheme.
Well, let's hope not. That's great. Well, Adib, thanks for sharing that. We'll want to keep an eye on that. Anyone else have questions or anything you'd like to add?
I'll just offer, for anybody out there considering starting a CSA or IDA for that matter, I know AFI has been wonderful to Lakota Funds. We've received, many different grants to support our work with both adult and youth IDAs. But when you're looking for funding sources, do consider the Northwest Area Foundation has been so supportive of allowing Lakota Funds to make its own decisions about what's best for this community. And so wasn't as restrictive as some of the federal sources can be in determining how the savings has to be used. For example, in our child development accounts, we're allowed to, the kids are saving for educational expenses, but Lakota Funds has the ultimate approval of what is okay as an education, what's approved as an educational expense. For instance, many kids here wouldn't have enough money to buy school supplies or school clothes. So you know what, that's an educational expense, and Northwest Area Foundation is fine with it. And I think that is doubly beneficial, honestly, because it also provides an incentive to the kid who owns the account. They get to go out there and feel good about buying their own school supply, their own, clothes and stuff, and they're still within the bounds of calling it an educational expense. It's an incentive, in other words, just by participating.
Yeah, it's a great point. Again, the federal funding is fantastic and has particular restrictions on it. So your funding source really will dictate in such a large way what you can and can't do in terms of your flexibility with how the funds can be used. So thanks, Tawny, for raising that point. And we're going to need to move on in just a minute to make sure that we wrap up at the half hour here. But I also just want to call out Christy Finsel a little bit here and just say that she's a really terrific resource and has such deep expertise in Native communities, but also in the AFI space. She's one of the consultants that works with the team that runs AFI, and is just a fabulous connection to have. So if you don't already know Christy, make sure she's on your list. So I'm sorry, I hope we're not cutting off too much conversation here, but we want to make sure we talk about this TA opportunity. So I'm going to turn it back to Kim to do that.
Great, thanks, Leigh. And we are going to mush through these real quick so that we have enough time to answer any questions you have at the end, because we do want to have a hard stop at 4:30. So just to say, we're really pleased that we can announce this opportunity, which is geared especially to the members of ONABEN's Social Entrepreneurship Initiative Network, and supported by a generous investment from the Northwest Area Foundation. And if you're interested in designing and launching a children's savings account program in your community, you might want to put your hat in the ring to receive free one-on-one technical assistance from CFED in partnership with ONABEN to help you put your program together. We're going to be doing this work over the next 18 months, and we want to make sure that we provide some value add to some of you who are really interested in launching these systems. So what can we do? Not turn the mic off, just advance the slide. We can provide strategic advice in designing and launching your children's savings account program. We can identify account products and help you design the savings incentives. We can promote family engagement in saving. We can design effective evaluation tools and have before. And we can also access the best available information for you on children and youth savings policy and practice, including some models from Native American communities. And if you're interested in working with us, we have an easy application process that we will be releasing in the next few weeks. It'll be really kind of geared towards your responses, and we'll select one or two TA partners, depending on what kind of demand there is, for 2012 and another cohort for 2013. So those partners will work hand in hand with CFED to both design and implement a technical assistance plan that works for you. And we'll do it by phone, by email, on site. We may be able to attend various events that you will be managing to help with that. So we just want to work with you and figure out what's the best way to structure it. All we ask in return is that you have a organizational commitment to the process. And by organizational commitment, we do mean, you know, top to bottom, everyone within an organization all pulling in the same direction to get this TA. So the next steps are for you to watch your inbox or your mailbox for a copy of this presentation and also the TA application materials. If you have questions, you can contact either Leigh or myself. Here's our information on the screen. And we are free to talk with you about this at any time. We want to make sure that we spend the last minute or so answering any questions that you have right now, though, so we will take a few questions right now. Please unmute your phones, and if you do want to send it in electronically, we're also monitoring that, too. Any questions? Any ideas for us? Okay. Well, I'm just going to turn it back to Leigh to thank our other presenter.
Sure. So we really want to thank Veronica and ONABEN for offering us this opportunity to talk with you and to work with the ONABEN partners. And we want to thank the Northwest Area Foundation, who has, again, sponsored this work in this webinar. And just to say that it's really an honor to have this chance to work closely and in whatever way sort of is valuable to you and your team to do this, to explore how we promote asset building for children and youth in your community. So again, keep an eye out for more word from us. We'll be in touch very soon, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks, ladies, for your time. You know, we appreciate your dedication to asset building, and certainly, you know, we're so excited to have this partnership with you.
Very helpful, you guys. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.